Hello everybody, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and welcome back to Zen Movies, where I take a look at one of the numerous different films in my collection. Subsequently, for the first time in 2 years, welcome back to Zenoween, where grim grinning ghosts come out to socialize, and I discuss horror material on the show. Now, for those who missed it, last year there technically wasn't a Zenoween episode, since our planned one-shot for Dracula ended up being delayed to February and made into our annual anniversary video. What can I say, that first Danganronpa video took a lot out of us, but I'm sure the second game's video is faring much better by now. In any event, it's that time of the year, my buns, and I have stocked up on Frankenberry, Booberry, and Count Chocula as I eagerly await the haunted hijinks I usually get up to during this month. Unfortunately, seeing as we're still dealing with the ramifications of the incident that happened not too long ago, we only have time for one Zenoween episode this year. I know it sucks, but hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have the entire thing swept under the rug. In any case, much like Dracula before, we had all of you pitch in this year and vote on which film you wanted to see us cover for Zenoween. And of all the options available, you buns pretty unanimously decided that Coraline should be the topic of this year's video. Well, I'm more than happy to oblige, especially with an editor who's crazy for this film as is.
Animation smell.
So grab your black cats, put on your night vision goggles, and prepare yourself for body horror, because it's time to delve into Laika's 2009 classic, Coraline. For those unaware, Coraline is a dark fantasy horror film created by stop-motion animation studio Laika. It was their first official film as a company, however, you'd likely recognize the talent behind the studio from other stop-motion ventures. For example, prior to Coraline's release, director Henry Selick also worked on The Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, Monkey Bone, and The Fantastic Mr. Fox. Selick was well versed in stop-motion animated films and brought a unique flair to the projects he worked on for Disney. However, Monkey Bone was a flop, and he ended up leaving Wes Anderson's Fantastic Mr. Fox to work on Coraline for the newly formed Laika. He would later leave Laika to work exclusively with Pixar, which would unfortunately lead to more behind-the-scenes conflict when the projects he worked on never came to fruition, and he left Pixar as well. Luckily, this isn't Selick's final project, since he directed the film Wendell and Wild with help from Jordan Peele of all people, which premiered at a film festival this September with a pending late October release. I am uncertain exactly what turmoil was happening behind the scenes with several of these projects, but I am at least glad that he's still working on stop-motion films today. As for Laika themselves, this was a studio founded by Phil Knight and his son Travis Knight, which is surprising to me since Phil is also the co-founder of Nike. Yeah, the shoe company. I was confused by this as well, but it turns out that Laika was formed from Will Vinton Studios, which worked on a bunch of stop motion, claymation, and other such short films and commercials back in the day. Interestingly enough, Will Vinton was executive producer of The Wild for Disney and worked on Adventures in Wonderland and Meet the Raisins. He was also a claymation director on Return to Oz, which just makes way too much sense now that I think about it. As Will Vinton Studios, they created several award-winning shorts, including the 1979 short The Little Prince and other such claymation shorts. In fact, the term claymation was coined by Will Vinton himself, which has become synonymous for clay animation in the modern day. This company went on to produce other short films, including 1980's Dinosaur and 1985's The Adventures of Mark Twain. However, the latter would be their only theatrical film, as Vinton was tapped to work on effects for Return to Oz, Captain EO, and the Speed Demon portion of Moonwalker. While he was commissioned to work on further claymation shorts for CBS, Vinton himself worked with Disney and other studios on their projects. For example, Will Vinton Studios created 2 short films that would eventually lead to the show Hey Arnold on Nickelodeon. The studio's work on outside projects helped to put them on the map in a big way, and by the late 2000s, they had enough income to pull outside investors such as Nike. So, while Laika was technically founded by Phil and Travis Knight, it very much was created by Will Vinton and his legacy of claymation that led to stop-motion animation and other projects for outside studios. It's so fascinating to see how one of my favorite studios in Laika came to be, especially given just how much talent was present from the beginning of the company's life. They would later go on to create such acclaimed films as Paranorman and Kubo and the Two Strings, the latter of which I have seen in theaters and absolutely adore. Though Coraline was the first and is by far the most well regarded and known by the animation community. People still talk about Coraline to this day, and that, my friends, is no small feat. As for me personally, I know Studio Laika more for their contract works, such as Corpse Bride, which came out in September of 2005. When I was younger, I saw Corpse Bride in theaters, and I was blown away by this film in a big way. It was delightfully different and had the same flair of The Nightmare Before Christmas, since it was directed by Tim Burton, but was produced by Laika for Warner Brothers. Laika kicked it out of the park with the animation on Corpse Bride, and I tried to watch any future projects that they had in store. That said, I haven't seen any of their other contract works, which includes stuff like animation for A Very Harold and Kumar Christmas. Yeah, sure, why not? But I did end up watching Coraline when it premiered in 2009 while I was knee-deep in my edgelord phase. Needless to say, this film struck the same chord with me as Corpse Bride. However, as time went on, my opinion changed and I grew to dislike the movie in a big way. I was given the DVD set one year as a gift, and I remember not liking it all that much when I actually sat down to rewatch the film. One of my main criticisms at the time was that I felt like Coraline was too much of a bully and not very smart, considering the way she treated YB and her neighbors. I put the DVD down for a bit and haven't touched it since, but perhaps it's time to reevaluate my opinion on the film. After all, my opinion on films changes over time a lot, and my old reviews can certainly attest to the fact that I didn't think very hard back in those days when it came to film analysis. With all of that out of the way, let's explore the world of Coraline and give this intriguing novella adaptation another chance. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's right. This film's an adaptation of a novella made by Neil Gaiman. Yeah, I guess it's licensed media limbo time! Coraline tells the story of an 11-year-old girl who moves from Pontiac, Michigan to Ashland, Oregon, and is absolutely miserable. Used to a snowy winter, she is now surrounded by a dreary dead garden, neighbors who seem to have a few screws loose, and weather that consists of mist and pouring rain. Her parents are too busy writing and editing a garden catalog to pay her enough attention, and the only child her age in the area is an awkward boy named Wybie who has some weird interests and appears to be stalking her, along with a mangy stray cat that he takes care of. On top of all of this, she acquires a poison oak rash when she tries to find an old well. Her parents take no notice of this and forbid her from going out to play in the garden while it's raining. So she's forced to explore the old apartment instead, which is full of creaky floors, brown, disgusting water, and nasty bugs. It seems as if there's nothing to enjoy about this dreadful move until she discovers a tiny door hidden behind the wallpaper. After pleading with her mother for a bit, she uncovers the door and unlocks it, only to find a brick wall just behind. It appears as if this is the end of her adventures, until she is awoken late that night by some mice and chases them back to the tiny door to find a strange, glowing hallway where the bricks used to be. At the end of the brilliant corridor is a door that leads to an apartment nearly identical to the one she left behind, where she finds someone who looks almost exactly like her mother, with buttons in place of where her eyes should be. This person introduces herself as Coraline's other mother, who resides here with Coraline's other father, who has the same buttoned eyes. Coraline is initially hesitant to eat dinner with them, but her hunger gets the best of her since her real father made a recipe that night. His recipes consist of chard and cheese and other such combinations that children aren't fond of, whereas in this other apartment, her other parents offer delicious roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, and all sorts of delights. The other mother explains that everyone has another mother and that they want her to move in with them when she's ready, but it doesn't have to be right away. Over the course of several days, Coraline travels between the real world and the other world, with her real parents either ignoring her or not believing her stories, while the other parents offer her a world of delights. A jumping mouse circus directed by the other Mr. Bobinski, who in the real world is her upstairs neighbor and appears to be a crazy old man who likes to do circus tricks. A fantastic, extravagant garden presented by her other father on a flying grasshopper. And finally, a theatrical production by the other Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, who in the real world are her elderly downstairs neighbors. The real Spink and Forcible are retired burlesque actresses who seem to speak nonsense and fight all the time. However, in the other world, they are attached to the theater as they produce extravagant reenactments of famous paintings for Coraline.
Ah! Good God! It's hideous, but beautiful in an ugly way, but mostly hideous. Ugh.
It is here where I'm going to start delving into spoilers. And while this film is over 13 years old, older than Coraline in fact, if you would prefer not to have the twist spoiled for you, please stop the analysis here and watch the film for yourself. We come to find out from the cat that Wybie takes care of, who is suddenly able to talk, that this other world is a trap designed by the other mother to hold her hostage. Coraline doesn't believe him at first, but one night the other mother and other father bring her a gift of buttons, which they want to sew into her eyes so she can stay with them forever and ever.
And that's my cue to exit.
Run away! Run away!
After further horrors are revealed about the other world, Coraline is stuffed into a mirror by the other mother until she, quote, learns respect, where she finds 3 ghost children. They explain that the other mother is a beldam. No, not the Pokemon, but instead an evil hag or shape-shifting witch that feeds on the life of children. She steals the eyes of children and uses them to sustain her life essence, which is what she's done to the 3 ghost children. With the help of the other Wybie, she manages to escape, but her real parents have been kidnapped by the Beldam, so it's up to Coraline to return to the other world and challenge the Beldam to a game, which they have a weakness for, find the children's eyes, and rescue her real parents before everything she loves is lost for good. This story is really gripping from start to finish, and it has a lot to do with the setup of the real world. Ashland, Oregon, and the residents of the Pink Palace apartments are not presented as enjoyable things. Everything in the real world seems dull and gray. Her parents are negligent and don't listen to what Coraline is really saying, while her neighbors talk nonsense and she isn't allowed to do anything that she wants to do. It all builds up to a fight between Coraline and her real mother, after which Coraline fully intends to stay in the other world. You can completely understand her reasoning too, because there's so much a young kid would find upsetting about this particular move, and so much that's inviting about the other world. However, as the trap starts to unravel, the other shoe drops, and you see the other world for what it really is. A realm of horrors that are merely twisted illusions of the real world. This is what I find quite brilliant about the setup. It doesn't initially feel like a horror film in many ways, but as the movie goes on, what seems friendly and enticing becomes twisted and disgusting. The realm of wonders becomes a house of horrors, with each wonder broken down to what it really is. The transformation of the Beldam from sweet and saccharine to downright horrifying starts gradually with the types of dresses she wears appearing more and more spider-like, and the furniture more bug-like, until she changes into a second and a third form that grows more and more gruesome over time.
This isn't even my final form!
Final form my ass!
Make no doubt, this is a horror film, and it fully embraces that with the juxtaposition between the two worlds, luring in Coraline only to reveal its ugly interior. Honestly, I feel that's one major thing that Coraline excels at, taking various objects and creating body horror out of them. The film takes ordinary objects and deconstructs them to show how they can be incredibly creepy. For example, there's a sequence at the beginning where a doll is taken apart piece by piece, the stitching unraveled, the eyes removed, mouth slit open, stuffing taken out, and the whole doll turned inside out before our very eyes. Ordinarily, this process would be something unremarkable and wouldn't be worth noting, but the way in which they present this scene almost feels like an actual child is being torn apart, dismembered, and reassembled right before our eyes. It is simply chilling, and it isn't the only instance of body horror. The Beldam stretching and growing increasingly more spider-like, the other Mr. Bobinski becoming just rats in a coat, Miss Spink and Miss Forcible being fused together like taffy, and the dogs growing bat wings are just a few examples of how this film transforms the mundane and safe into something out of your nightmares. I simply love how they pull the rug out from under us, especially as everything begins to unravel into a gigantic spider web, and the tunnel from the beginning goes from entrancingly beautiful to dark and menacing, eventually becoming full of dust and cobwebs and forgotten children's toys. The horror of Coraline is making you afraid of common items around you, and I think it does it quite brilliantly. Side note, this movie is rated PG. Yeah, I'm still surprised about that. The only scene I really took umbrage with is the scene at the theater with the other Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, where we are shown two ladies in their early 70s in very little clothing. They are supposed to be reenacting the birth of Venus and Ulysses in the Sirens, and to be fair, Miss Forcible is wearing more clothes than the woman in the birth of Venus.
Yeah, I'm ready to be born, damn it!
That being said, I hardly think this is appropriate for children. I want to stress that I am not a prude and I have no problem with burlesque shows. Burlesque is a fun and fantastic form of self-expression, but normally at panels you have to be over 18 to view them, and Coraline is 11. I am glad that author Neil Gaiman confirmed on Tumblr that Spink and Forcible are lesbian lovers, and their constant rivalry and argumentative nature is hilarious. But I'm sorry, I don't want to see the nearly naked grandma.
Naked, huh?
To be clear, it's not because they are a bit heftier than normal. Thick women are perfectly healthy and fine in my book. I'm not trying to be ageist either, but when I'm watching a horror film, I don't want to randomly see a naked grandma without any warning.
I don't want to see that either.
What really gets me about this scene is that it was not in the original source material, and it's supposed to be one of the nicer scenes where Coraline gets to be a part of the show, and we're supposed to laugh at the nearly naked elderly woman, and I'm over here being horrified because this one scene stuck with me more than most of the film. If you find it funny, more power to you. And if you are this old and still confident in your sex appeal, that's perfectly fine too. I would just rather not have you flaunt it at a preteen for comedy.
This is bad comedy.
Moving on, let's discuss these characters and how they improve upon the story of the film. Coraline herself is someone who I have stated I did not like as a kid. But upon my rewatch for this review, I really did enjoy her as the protagonist. I think what really works about Coraline is that she clearly isn't perfect. She can be bratty, vindictive, argumentative, and sometimes annoying when she is bored. But at the same time, that is also balanced by her reasons for being this way. She is an 11-year-old, and they are often easily distracted and catty towards those who wrong them. But Coraline realizes when she was wrong and tries to make it up. For example, when the cat calls her out on her behavior, she apologizes and does better in the future.
Your cat's not wild. He's a wuss puss.
What? After all, I'm just a big fat wuss puss.
Come back, please. I'm sorry I called you that. I really am.
In addition to this, part of the reason she takes out her frustrations on her parents and those around her is the situation she's in. She moved from a place of snow, leaving behind her friends, only to get nothing but rain, parents who are too busy to pay full attention to her, and neighbors that seem to talk at her rather than to her, emphasized with said neighbors mispronouncing her name constantly.
Caroline what?
Coraline.
It's the new neighbor, Miriam. Caroline. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline.
Caroline.
Coraline.
She feels depressed and ignored, and when the neighbors take an interest in her, it makes it worse since she doesn't understand them. However, what makes Coraline truly shine is how she learns and grows over the course of the film. She makes mistakes, certainly, like when she calls YB "Why Were You Born?" or when she says Mr. Bobinski is crazy and Spink and Forcible are, quote, dingbats. God, she's a savage little shit, ain't she? But over time, she begins to realize they are merely eccentric and trying to help her. She consults all of them, and in the end, lets her parents know that these are good people, and that kind of growth is what I love out of a character. This is a coming-of-age movie for Coraline, and she's only able to defeat the Beldam with everyone's help. So yeah, my opinion on her has greatly changed over time, and I think I was harsher back then, mostly because I was bullied in high school. Also, I don't know why I thought Coraline was dumb, since she's cautious of the other parents all throughout the film, and their seeming kindness is what changes that. like how they treated her poison oak on day 1. She's still cautious on day 2, but that starts to be worn down as they keep being kind to her. Coraline is voiced by a young Dakota Fanning just before her appearance in Twilight. Interestingly enough, though, she recorded her lines well before that film ever came out. You see, Dakota was 15 years old when she starred in New Moon, but she was cast as Coraline at age 9. She was 12 when they started recording her lines, and they tweaked and re-recorded as she grew up, and they made the film. According to the director's commentary, Dakota was 14 when the film was released in February of 2009, meaning this was a 5-year process of casting and recording, but I think it really paid off. Fanning was perfect in the role, emphasizing the strong points of the character. She really brings about the childish nature of Coraline with the way she interacts with her parents, but also believably showcases her wit and daring. I think Fanning was definitely the correct choice, and there are several moments in the film where her acting and delivery made me cry or got me excited to see the character further, which is exactly what was needed since Coraline is the heart and soul of the film. What's also interesting to me is that Dakota was the first person to be cast for the film, and Selleck secured the other roles around her to make this a memorable project. Speaking of, let's discuss the other main cast members, starting with her parents, her other parents, and the beldam. John Hodgman plays the father, and every form of the other father, who also degrades and transforms as time goes on. You may know Hodgman for his roles in The Daily Show, Flight of the Conchords, or Baby Mama, but this was the first acting role that I've seen him in personally. On the other side of the coin, Terry Hatcher voices Coraline's mother in every form of the beldam. Terry has had a long career before Coraline, including Paris Carver in Tomorrow Never Dies, Mrs. Gradenko in Spy Kids, and Lois in Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. She's had a varied career with numerous television appearances that continue to this day. Honestly, I think both of these casting choices were spot on and brought a certain level of energy to the roles. Hodgman would often ad-lib lines according to Selleck, but you would never notice with his level of delivery. And Terry brings this cold yet caring, motherly touch to every version of the mother. I think what really works about these characters is that it isn't completely one-sided in favor of Coraline. Her parents may seem neglectful at first because they are completely tied to their work, and they are lousy tippers as well, but you can clearly see that they do care about Coraline. They just have a rapidly approaching deadline at work and don't have enough time to spend with her, especially if you pay attention to what seems to be a throwaway line about Coraline's mother getting into a car accident before the film, hence her neck brace.
But then, we had the accident.
It wasn't my fault you hit that truck.
I never said it was.
Part of the fault lies with them not taking turns, watching and playing with her like they should be doing, but they are clearly very tired from the move and don't have enough energy to fully look after her. Coraline doesn't make it easy on them either, with her constant interruptions, noises, and accidentally turning off the power and making her father lose progress.
No.
It is very clear that Coraline has valid issues with her parents, but they also have valid issues with her, and that is brought across very well in their performances. At the same time, you can see why Coraline is drawn to the other world, since her other mother and father seem much nicer. They cook better meals that she would like. They always pay attention to her and play with her and let her wear whatever clothes she likes.
We will listen to you and laugh with you. If you stay here, you can have whatever you want, Pasigda. Always.
It's very enticing to a young child who doesn't understand why grown-ups have to work all the time or why they cook seemingly strange foods. I think Coraline is a film that really grows with you, since as a child you can identify with Coraline and her struggle, and as an adult you can identify with the parents and the struggles of adulthood. Everyone has their story to tell, and they do a good job showing both sides of the story, leading to a climactic third act where you want them both to get back together. It's a bit of a combination between Home Alone and Spirited Away, and I like the direction they go in. They keep Coraline a strong character that has to save the day, but she grows and evolves while we see why her parents had restrictions in the first place. Next up, we have Wybie, who is a character invented to round out the film, since he wasn't in the original story. When I was younger, I didn't like the inclusion of Wybie because he seemed to exist solely for Coraline to bully in the film, but that really isn't the case. Wybie is the awkward grandchild of the owner of the Pink Palace, and his first impression is not very good. He appears to be stalking Coraline. He doesn't fully listen to her, and he gets her name wrong while spouting nerdy gibberish. He reminds me a lot of myself as a child, come to think of it, which is why Coraline is annoyed with him at first. They're both young kids with very different interests, and that tends to clash, but Wybie is anxious and tends to respond sheepishly rather than telling her off. At the same time, when he returns later on in the film as he hunts banana slugs, the two of them have a bonding moment and they seem to grow closer as a result. I mean, Wybie doesn't seem to hold any of her remarks against her. They don't truly become friends until the end of the film, where Wybie comes in and saves her from the other mother's hand and helps her throw it in the well, but you do see a certain bond forming between the two of them throughout the film. I may have disliked him at first, since he hit very close to home, but Wybie is an interesting character, and he helps tie the story together, since his grandmother's sister was one of the victims of the beldam, which is why he's told to avoid the Pink Palace entirely. His caretaking of the cat and the story with his grandmother serve to tie things together, while Wybie serves as a counterpoint to Coraline, especially since the other Wybie helps her escape from the mirror when the other mother locks her inside. Wybie is played by Robert Bailey Jr., who has played a lot of roles that I am not familiar with. The closest that I can recall is Boy in Park from the movie Under Wraps, but otherwise I believe Wybie was one of his largest roles outside of Dr. Paul Cummings on The Night Shift, which I haven't seen. I think he brings a brilliant, fervent, awkward energy to Wybie that isn't annoying, but still is enjoyable to watch. He does a great job in the role, and I love his little voice cracks when he gets nervous. He plays the perfect nerdy preteen, and it works really well for the character. With the main cast out of the way, let's talk about the supporting cast. I suppose I should start by discussing the cat with no name, who is voiced by Keith David, which is simply perfect casting. You may recognize Keith for his roles as Goliath in Gargoyles, Dr. Facilier in Princess and the Frog, and Captain Anderson in Mass Effect.
He's got his uses. And if you want something done on the Citadel, he knows who can make it happen.
I haven't played much Mass Effect, admittedly, but I instantly recognized him and Seth Green because they have such recognizable voices. I don't think I've ever seen Keith in a bad role, because he just has incredible vocal delivery, and the cat is no exception. I mean, the cat isn't a very major role, but he plays it with such sass and sarcasm, and much of his dialogue is ripped right from the book.
No, I'm not the other anything. I'm me. Challenge her then. She may not play fair, but she won't refuse. She's got a thing for games. I think I mentioned that I don't like rats at the best of times. It looked like you needed this one, however.
I just love him in every scene he's in, and he really steals the show. Next up, we have Miss Spink, voiced by Jennifer Saunders, and Miss Forcible, voiced by Dawn French. Now, I'm actually a bit torn on Spink and Forcible because I really do enjoy their comedic timing. I think the actresses have wonderful chemistry, and they are very true to the book. However, the major issue is the change they made to the type of acting these characters do. In the book, they were Shakespearean actresses that juggled, but here they are burlesque performers who do trapeze. I do think it's funny and does make a certain type of sense. However, the reason these British actresses are even in Ashland, Oregon is because of the Ashland Shakespeare Festival, and that doesn't make sense for them as burlesque performers. According to the posters in their room, they perform raunchy versions of Shakespearean plays. And to be fair, Shakespeare was always raunchy and aimed at the lowest common denominator. But it does change the context of the other Spink and Forcible's theater sequence. In the book, it was a recitation of Shakespeare and a simple juggling act going on forever, with Coraline filling in as an assistant for a knife-throwing sequence. I can see changing that due to fear of it being violent for kids, but going burlesque was certainly a choice. In the film, they are recreating the paintings The Birth of Venus and Ulysses and the Sirens, which is interesting, don't get me wrong, but doesn't make sense if they are Shakespearean performers. I guess it's more of a backdrop for their acting, but all I'm left with is two pairs of gigantic granny tits staring me in the face. I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but even in the commentary on the DVD, Selig explains that he did this for comedy and that this sequence is very upsetting to prudish people. An old lady in a skimpy outfit is not funny to some. But what's the punchline exactly? Is it just because she's a tasteful version of the naked lady from the painting?
Psst, it's Aphrodite.
I guess, but even still, I don't know why this would be funny. Others have said that they did enjoy it on Twitter, but the majority of people that I polled said Naked Grandma was traumatizing.
I know you're right, okay? Nobody wants to see a naked grandma, but what are the chances?
Keep that shit to The Shining, or The Visit, or It Chapter 2. Man, a lot of horror films like doing this, don't they? Even taking all that into consideration, I find they dial up the lewd parts with Spink and Forcible way too much, especially with these posters in their house. It just feels a bit out of left field, and while I overall love the performance and the characters, this aspect does hurt it for me because it boils down two lesbian characters to simple fan service. Finally, we have Ian McShane as Mr. Bobinski, who is simply a delight. You may recognize McShane as Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda, Mr. Wednesday in American Gods, and Blackbeard in Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. Or not, no one seems to remember that film after all. That said though, he has a penchant for playing eccentric and deep-voiced villains. So Mr. Bobinski is a bit different for him, but he is living it up as this eccentric Russian Cirque du Soleil performer. In the book, he was a bit different since he was supposed to be of Eastern European descent, and they never stated his name until the very end of the book, where he is instead named Mr. Bobo. He is also training a mouse orchestra instead of a circus in the book. Mr. Bobo was very understated in the book, although they lifted most of his important lines for the film, which I think works really well. I much prefer Mr. Bobinski in the film because of just how insanely quotable and energetic his performance is. He's basically a circus version of Zangief from Street Fighter with somewhat broken English and eccentricities, especially his love of beats.
Have beat make you strong.
But he is very down to earth and fun to be around. I love the contrast between normal Mr. Bobinski, who is bombastic and in your face, oompa oompa, and the other Mr. Bobinski, who is suave and debonair and lets his mice do the talking. In some cases, literally. I think they truly captured the heart of Mr. Bobinski, even if he isn't too much like the reserved person in the book. This is one of my favorite roles from Ian McShane, and I have to say he kicked it out of the park here. Now it is time to talk about the biggest and most impressive aspect of Coraline, the presentation. Even today, I am simply blown away by the visuals of Coraline. It is very clear they spent an insane amount of time creating all of these stop-motion puppets because it looks fantastic. The interesting thing about this, though, is that this film was originally going to be a live-action production. There wasn't a lot of faith in stop motion at the time, and the studio kept pushing for live action, but Selick wasn't really feeling it when they started because stop motion aged better than live action or CGI did. They then moved on to a combination of CG and stop motion, with the real world being CG and the other world being stop motion, but Selick felt like it didn't make a big difference. In the commentary, he stated that it just didn't add anything to the film, and he turned to Travis Knight, who is actually the lead animator for the entire project, for a final decision. It was Travis who pushed hard for a stop-motion film and ended up hand animating so much of this film. Yeah, again, the son of the Nike guy. The stuff in the beginning where the grass moves in the background and the dirt moves off the well. That's all him, and he does such a good job. Selick was supremely grateful that Travis pushed for this, as the final product turned out far better than anything they attempted before. And I have to agree, it is just incredible the journey this film took, but also the amount of detail. They utilized new invisible wire technology to move the characters' hair so that they felt real, and they did the same with trees and other background elements in order to make it come to life. They made over 500 dogs to animate for the theater sequence alone, and the fog that comes in during the second half of the film was added in post, but it looks seamless. In addition to this, they used revolutionary new 3D technology for the sequences in the other world to give that realm more depth and a sense of wonder. Personally, I am not a huge 3D connoisseur because I wear glasses and putting 3D glasses over them tends to hurt my eyes. However, I did see Avatar in 3D and found the immersion fantastic, even if the plot was cliché. When I saw Coraline in theaters, I did see the 3D showings, but even without 3D glasses, this film is a marvel. They shot the entire film in 3D, so it fits very well, but this also helps to smooth the film out because the 3D effects are environmental 3D. The 3D shots of the gravy train and the spinning piano song sequence are still fantastically done because they feel more dynamic, and as a result, this 3D doesn't feel like a gimmick. It enhances the film, although I still haven't watched the 3D version of my DVD, even if I do own the anaglyph glasses. I just prefer the film as is because it still looks wonderful today. I mean, just look at all the different puppets and transformation sequences for the Beldam. It is gorgeous, and you never see any of the seams. Simply beautiful. As for the music, done by Bruno Coulet, it sucks you into the world of the film. Music is a very important tool for any medium, but especially when it comes to horror and fantasy, you need a good score, and I can't get enough of this soundtrack. You have a couple really well done insert songs here, such as the Other Father song by They Might Be Giants, as well as Spink Enforcible's Number. Funnily enough, this was actually a stand-in song that Selig wanted They Might Be Giants to rework, but they said it was good enough already, so they ended up leaving it as is. The true highlight to me, though, is the Hungarian orchestra and choir, which takes up 95% of the soundtrack and is equal parts haunting, atmospheric, and altogether entrancing. They do a lot to make this film feel otherworldly, and while different from the nonsense songs the mice sang in the book,
"We were here before you rose, we will be here when you fall,"
this gives me chills every time I watch it. It is so creepy, but you just can't stop listening to it. It gives you a sense of danger, but there's this whimsy that you can't run away from. I love it. Now, before we wrap things up, I wanted to quickly take a look at some of the differences between this film and the book it's based on. I actually went on Audible before starting this script and purchased the audiobook for Coraline, narrated by Neil Gaiman himself. I even gave Tifa a copy as well, since I get so many free Audible credits that I don't know what to do with. To be clear though, we're not sponsored by Audible. Yet. Hey Audible, hit me up. In any case, Gaiman does an amazing job with his delivery, which is to be expected since he does a bunch of voice work and even did one of the trailers for the film. The Kumpunophobia trailer, which has him explaining the fear of buttons and how he wanted to make the ordinary into something scary, gives me chills because of his delivery, and that carries throughout the book. Makes me want to pick up the Sandman audiobook in the future because of how good it was. As for the major differences, I already talked about YB not being in the book, which really helps to balance the story a bit more and give reason for the cat to help Coraline at the end of the story. She really should have kept the cat in the book, but hey, it walks in the space between spaces, so it's probably off to help someone else now. Aside from that, and the changed relationship of Spink and Forcible, which have been amped up significantly from the book, there are only two major differences to note here. The first is a change that I am super fond of because it was really weird in the book. You see, Coraline only spends 2 days in the other world in the book. The first day, the beldam offered her the buttons, and I just had to stop listening for a bit because who would say yes after only a day in that dream world? In the movie, they have it set over the course of several days, where Coraline goes back and forth and is offered increasingly more fantastic gifts that show to her that the other mother can indeed be trusted. Hell, Selig used the poison oak in the beginning as a tool to not only show this was all real, but also to say that the other parents can be trusted. It's a much better progression of events, and I still am a bit miffed at the reasoning of the beldam in the book. Admittedly, the idea is that this is potentially a dark fae in the book, considering the Fey-well is mentioned, and in Fey and other lore, the food is enchanted in order to keep you there. But I think the film does a better job of creating a sense of security with the other realm before dropping the act. The second major change is that Coraline has a much closer relationship with her parents in the film. In the book, they disappear within the first few chapters. But because the film takes place over several days, we actually get a lot more about the parents, what their job is, and a larger fight between Coraline and her mother. Fun fact, the producers actually wanted to cut the clothes shopping scene for money because it was a huge expense for a new set only to be used once. But this is the most important scene in the film where tensions build to a head. I actually feel more for the parents in the film because we actually get to empathize with them even if we do identify with Coraline. With all that being said, I think this is one of the best adaptations I have seen on the big screen. Scott Pilgrim does come close, but I've only read the first volume of the graphic novel, which, while adapted one-to-one, isn't a good judge for how the rest of the story is carried over. And if Phil's account is anything to go by, I'd say Coraline blows it out of the water. Listening to the book after having seen the film is such a strange experience. I could envision everything that was happening, and many of the lines are placed into the film from the book, although cut for running time. The film just tweaks the pace a bit and focuses more on the family dynamic, adding another connection in YB and his grandma, but it never feels out of place. In so many aspects, the film is beat for beat what the book was, and just trims and adjusts what needed to be tweaked for the movie. For example, one of the more awkward parts of the book was the ending, which is incredibly dragged out, with the Hand of the Beldam lurking outside and attacking the dogs, which takes place over a week if I recall correctly. Now, that was fine for building tension, but there was a half hour of that book that could have been trimmed, and the whole plan with the tea party didn't really fit Coraline as a character. She said she was too old for dolls in the book, and her ruse was not very convincing. The film tweaks this a bit so that YB comes to her rescue and they take out the hand together. Overall, a better paced take on the same idea. I really enjoyed the book and highly recommend the audiobook narrated by Gaiman. It's not a perfect book, but for the most part it is gripping just like the film, and I'd give it a Kana stamp of approval plus. However, when it comes to the film, I give it the coveted super stamp of approval, the highest honor that we have on this show. This is a masterwork and one of my top adaptations of all time. It's visually stunning, it's incredibly well acted and paced in both the voice acting and animation department. It has one of the best musical scores of any film I've ever seen. And despite my problems with Spink Enforceable, it is a fantastic adaptation that carries the heart and soul of what Coraline really is. Therefore, it is also safe to say that it passes licensed media limbo with flying colors. Please watch this film. I know you won't be disappointed. Coraline is currently available on both Blu-ray and DVD. I only had the DVD version for the longest time, which comes with 3D glasses and director's commentary, which is a goldmine of information. However, while I am happy with this version, I hate how the DVD itself is unmarked. Yeah, this is one of those early DVD copies that has two sides, and it is ugly. The cover is perfectly fine, but the DVD itself looks like I have a bootleg copy of Coraline because you have to flip it over for the 3D version of the film, and I just hate the way it looks. Ugh. My OCD went into overdrive for this one, so I ended up getting the 2-disc collector's edition Blu-ray release after scripting this review, just so it looks good when I watch it. I am unsure what the DVD's price was when I got it, since it was a present from a family member, but currently it is available on Amazon for $10 on DVD and multi-format, with the Blu-ray Collector's Edition being around $20. Get it while you can, because this deserves to be in anyone's collection. Also, I have to draw attention to the DVD's extras for a sec. First of all, there is another trailer for Coraline called Mustachio, which is available on YouTube and goes through the process of them stop motion animating a mustache to hype up the film. It is really interesting, along with that Kumpunophobia trailer that I mentioned earlier. On the DVD itself, we also have a slew of nostalgic trailers, including Bring It On, Fight to the Finish, which is the 5th film in the franchise, making me feel incredibly old since I saw the second one in theaters. Dear God, where has the time gone? There's also a trailer for one of the Bionicle films, which just brought me back to my childhood because, man, I loved Bionicle as a kid, even if I never watched any of the shows or followed any of the lore. I just think they're neat. Finally, there's a trailer for the film 9, which for the longest time I thought was a Laika film as well. It turns out that this was merely produced by Focus Features and Tim Burton, which made it feel like a Laika film coming out at the same time, even though this film was completely CG. I remember seeing so many trailers for 9 back then, but not many people talk about it these days, partly due to the generic title. With the trailer pumping me up thanks to Coheed and Cambria doing the amazing backing track, I was really excited to see it at the time, but I never did. Seeing this trailer again on DVD brought back so many nostalgic memories, and it's yet another thing I really want to review at some point. Guess that's a task for all the patrons. At least make me review Corpse Bride or something actually made by Tim Burton, because that's something I really want to do. Well, in any case, I am Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns, and thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe so that you too can join the Bun Squad, my legion of cute, fluffy bunnies that watches my videos. And while you're here, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Special thanks to Kyle Huxtable, Raichu Overlord Ben, James Bevan, and Seraphim for supporting the channel already. Oh, and I guess Tifa's a patron now as well. Give yourself a congratulatory animation, Tifa, and a pat on the back because you do amazing work. And as always, don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of every new video. Have a good one, everybody!